The story begins on a cold, dreary November 26, 1986 evening. Josephina Rivera, 25, walks along 6th Street in North Philadelphia. She is determined to turn her life around after a year of struggle. Recently separated from her children due to her battle with drug addiction, Josephina is determined to find steady work and regain custody of her children. But her desperation for money has forced her to resume prostitution. The quiet streets make her feel uneasy that night, but she continues. Soon, an expensive Cadillac Coupe de Ville drives past her. The driver, a white man in his 40s, introduces himself as Gary. His plain appearance belies his strange mix of wealth and indifference, a gold chain and Rolex watch paired with a shabby jacket. After agreeing on a price, Josephina goes with him. Her usual caution wavered when Gary invited her to his home, a request she rarely accepted. However, his seemingly harmless demeanor and the promise of a higher reward convinced her to make up her mind. Gary's house at 3520 North Marshall Street was isolated from the dilapidated neighbors. A chain-link fence separated the house from the sidewalk, and the windows were reinforced with metal bars. Inside, the house was cluttered and eerie. Coins were taped to the walls and $1 bills were taped to the hallway. Despite the oddities, nothing foreshadowed the horrors that awaited Josephina. Upstairs, after a deal was done, Gary's demeanor changed. His casual questions about her children and fertility turned sinister. Without warning, Gary wrapped his arms around her neck. She struggled but succumbed to his overwhelming strength, waking only to find her hands cuffed. Her pleas for mercy fell on deaf ears as Gary led her down to the basement. There, in the damp, musty space, Josephina's nightmare deepened. A hole in the floor caught her eye, its size and location were unmistakably ominous. Gary chained her ankles to a pipe, securing it with a homemade device. She was forced into the hole, just big enough to hold her body. Gary had trapped her under a sheet of plywood covered with sandbags. A blaring radio drowned out her screams as she realized the grim truth: she was his prisoner. For days, Gary kept Josephina in the dark, literally and figuratively. He occasionally dragged her outside to beat her, rape her, or berate her. The radio's constant hum denied her moments of lucidity or hope. When she wasn't trapped in the hole, she endured a flimsy mattress under the constant threat of violence. But Josephina was not alone for long. A few days later, Gary brought Sandra Lindsay, a young woman with an intellectual disability, into the basement. Sandra had known Gary for years and considered him a friend. He exploited this trust to lure her into prison. Like Josephina, Sandra was chained and brutalized. Her confusion over Gary's betrayal reflected Josephina's growing understanding of her captor's twisted psychology. Gary freely shared his fantasies. He planned to build a family of 10 women to bear his children, creating a self-sufficient household untouched by social interference. It became clear to Josephina Gary's motives were not rooted simply in power or control. They were driven by a distorted vision of an ideal world. As the weeks passed, more women joined the cellar: Lisa Thomas, a 19-year-old mother lured by Gary's false generosity, and Deborah Dudley, whose violent resistance angered Gary. Each visit brought new terror and tension. Deborah's defiance, though admirable, drove Gary into a rage, leading to increasingly brutal beatings and punishments. Gary's cruelty knew no bounds. He forced the women to engage in violent acts with each other, manipulating them with food or moments of reprieve. His punishments escalated, culminating in horrific torture that included a water-filled hole and electric shocks. Sandra's health rapidly declined in the harsh conditions. Weak and malnourished, she became a target of Gary's anger. After choking on a piece of bread that Gary stuffed into her mouth, Sandra died from her injuries. Her death marked a chilling turning point. Gary's indifference to her death reinforced his inhumanity. He dismembered her body, attempting to dispose of the remains in the most gruesome manner imaginable. Sandra's death weighed heavily on the remaining captives, but Deborah's continued resistance fueled Gary's growing paranoia. When she defied him too many times, he increased his control. Using the same electroshock device, Gary carried out the death penalty, killing Deborah in front of the others. Josephina, now Gary's longest-held prisoner, realized her only way to survive was manipulation. She began to gain his trust, linking herself to his fantasies and desires. Her strategy worked. Gary gave her more freedom, allowing her to go upstairs and even taking her on errands. But Josephina's real goal was to escape not just for herself, but for the other women still in captivity. On March 23, 1987, Gary was caught completely off guard. After kidnapping another woman, Agnes Adams, he agreed to Josephina's request to visit her family. He dropped her off, believing she would return. Instead, Josephina went straight to a payphone and called 911. Her frantic pleas to the police finally set the wheels of justice in motion. Within hours, authorities raided 3520 North Marshall Street. The horrors they discovered were incomprehensible. Lisa Thomas, Jackie Askins, and Agnes Adams were freed from their chains, their emaciated bodies bearing witness to months of unimaginable abuse. Investigators found Sandra's remains in the freezer and oven, along with Deborah's decomposing body in the woods. The trial of Gary Heidnik drew national attention. His defense, insanity, was rejected by overwhelming evidence of his deliberate and methodical conduct in carrying out his crimes. In July 1988, Gary was convicted on all counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, and sentenced to death. Survivors faced years of psychological trauma, haunted by memories of their ordeal. Josephina Rivera, despite her pivotal role in rescuing them, has struggled with guilt and public scrutiny. Some question her actions, others hail her as a hero. The 1999 execution of Gary Heidnik brought some closure to the case, but questions remain about the systemic failures that allowed his crimes to continue. Why were these women overlooked? Why did the warning signs go unnoticed? Gary Heidnik's case left an indelible mark on the survivors, their families, and society as a whole. For the women who escaped his basement, the road to recovery was long and arduous. Josephina Rivera, who played a key role in ending Heidnik's reign of terror, has struggled with the weight of her decisions. Although she won freedom for herself and others, her methods, working with Heidnik to gain his trust, have been criticized by other survivors and the public. Rivera has maintained that her actions were motivated by a desire to survive and the hope that no one else would die. Jackie Askins, Lisa Thomas, and Agnes Adams faced their own battles. Physically weakened and emotionally scarred, the women had to rebuild their lives while haunted by memories of the basement. Askins, who was just 18 when she was rescued, spoke of lingering trauma, relying on medication to manage her anxiety and PTSD. For Lisa Thomas, the ordeal took months out of her young mother's life, leaving wounds that time will have a hard time healing. Heidnik's crime also exposed glaring failures in the system. Police ignored early warnings, including reports from Sandra Lindsay's family, dismissing them as unfounded concerns. Neighbors heard noises and noticed strange things but chose not to intervene. Despite the legal closure of Heidnik's execution in 1999, questions remain. How many more people might have been victims of his brutal actions? Could lives have been saved if authorities had acted sooner? Today, the survivors remain a symbol of resilience in the face of unspeakable horror. Their ordeal underscores the importance of vigilance, responsibility, and compassion for the vulnerable. While justice will be served, the scars left by Gary Heidnik's crimes are a stark reminder of human endurance and cruelty.